I'm Robert Woodbury. I'm a professor. I'm in Fraser University in Vancouver. And Gerard asked me to give the lecture in the course today. And it's a lecture on the social aspects of cities. But actually on two things. The city is a system, and in particular, the social aspects of city systems. The course is all about cities going from the small scale of individual buildings up to regions and giving the perspective that the city is a system. So what I'm really going to focus here today, while acknowledging all the other parts, all the other things that make up cities, that go to cities, I'm going to focus on people and politics, which is really individuals and groups of individuals, and how in different cases they impact a city's development, and how they're so crucial to many development. But I'd start with a provocation. Who here has heard the term near hierarchy? You know what a hierarchy is? Okay. Well, a near hierarchy is like a typical organization chart is a hierarchy. You have big units that are composed into smaller units, which are made up out of smaller units. And in things, we have hierarchies. We have the building, the structural system, the skin, the mechanical system, the electrical system, all hierarchies. But almost none of our artifacts that we make are pure hierarchies. They're near hierarchies. That means pieces of them link together. So the table that you're sitting on, some of you are sitting around it. It's a near hierarchy in that the structure, the surface is part of the structure. So the surface serves more than one function. So there are very, very good reasons why all human systems are near hierarchies. And just as an I'd like to try to name me any human system that is not a near hierarchy. It's not an organization, level by level organization, links organization. I'll give you one example that was a very, very important example in the automobile industry that built one inter-hierarchical link that was crucial. The difference between most modern cars and most cars of a generation ago, the major difference is the unibody construction, where the body itself became the structure of the car. Cars used to have frames with a body on top of them. Trucks still do, but most passenger cars today are unibody constructions. So that was a case of joining two hierarchies, joining them together, making a link between the structure and the skin, and making a stronger, a more complex near hierarchy out of things. What did unibody give us? Well, the unibody had one. It was done originally to make things cheaper. Bingo. The unibody allowed engineers to invent crumple zones. Cars are way, way more safe now. Accidents cost way more, right? Because the whole car crumples up. And what looks like a really bad accident might not really be. But safety was a byproduct of that change from frame to unibody. Now, this is reflected by this, or actually it goes the other way around. We design a near hierarchy, we can't do anything else. We are fundamentally cognitively incapable of designing strongly functioning shared systems. Where things are really, really interlinked from the beginning. When we get to things like the unibody, we do that over long periods of time and by developing design. So because we have to design this way, we end up with this. That's in way of provocation. I just love it when you think about this and disagree. But think seriously about every system you've seen and ask yourself how much function sharing happens when one part serves two roles, really happens in most systems. Okay, this idea goes back a long way. By the way, this is one article that every designer should read. It's a 1962 article in the It is an absolutely fabulous intellectual article, and it gives you, I think, a foundation for understanding a whole lot about the design. He was an extraordinary writer. He wrote several, in addition to the stuff that won him his Nobel Prize in economics, he was also a writer that appealed to a very, very large intellectual range. And some of his books are just great reading. Okay. I think just a little bit of what I want to talk about today, but it also allowed me to mischievously introduce this very big idea of the architecture of complexity. I encourage you guys to go get that article and read it. It's good reading, it's not too long, and it's very, very insightful and provocative. So, in a democracy, we try to end up with these things. Relatively equal distribution in power. It can never and never should be equal. Can never and probably should never be equal. And an inclusiveness in decision making. And the outcomes, I know Gerhard's about this, but I'm pretty sure he has. The outcomes of social systems that demonstrate equality and inclusion are typically cities that develop as better places to live. And today I'm going to give some examples of where people, because there was safety in protest, because there was an ability for people at different levels of society to stand up and say, this is the way we want it, or more importantly, we don't want it to happen this way. And because there was an inclusiveness in decision-making processes, cities ended up as better places than they would otherwise have been. And I'm going to start by pointing out that the systems that we live in, big cities we live in, every city has a historical arc. Every city you can't develop an understanding of a city without understanding how it came to be. So we know that there's this city, San Francisco, that has just south of it Silicon Valley, which is really a city of its own, that today has a very special place in the world. Tremendous amount of the world's wealth is generated in Silicon Valley. Well, there has always been a Silicon Valley, at least since the beginning of the Renaissance. There's always been a Silicon Valley. Where was it in 1900? Ideas? London? No. London, good guess. London was financial, but it wasn't the Silicon Valley. London was like Chicago or New York. New York's not Silicon Valley.
Paris?
Pardon?
Paris?
No, same thing. It was London in Europe. You guys are thinking finance?
Maastricht.
You're probably getting close, okay? Same right idea. It was Glasgow. Maastricht was a European equivalent, a European analog. The big one, though, was Glasgow. This is where much of the world's wealth was generated. The defense industry has been around a long time. Before the onset of World War I, someone took a photograph of the British Grand Fleet sitting in the Scapa Flow. You couldn't see the end of the fleet in the photograph. There were literally hundreds and hundreds of warships. Glasgow didn't build warships, built merchant ships. Shipbuilding was the highest tech that existed in the world in 1900. They were the most complex system, and the wealth of shipbuilding, just like the wealth of information technology spreads to other places through knowledge, the wealth of shipbuilding spread from Glasgow. through knowledge. But hold on, why? Here's just something from 1929. Of course, the industry took a very different form from the relatively clean in appearance Silicon Valley industry. These were big, big industrial places. Why did this happen in Glasgow? It didn't have to happen in Glasgow. I mean, here's Glasgow. Here's Europe. Much more population here. Concentrations of industry. There were big concentrations of industry in Europe. The Industrial Revolution hit Europe too. Glasgow's kind of it's at the end of a long inlet. It's on the wrong side, the far side of the British Isles. Why would the turn of the century Silicon Valley have happened in Glasgow? It turns out there's some really simple reasons. Of those simple reasons, when you look at a world map, there was not only industrial revolution here, there was a revolution here at the time. So Glasgow is kind of in the middle of the two, but that isn't the big reason. The big reason has to do with a little patch of the ocean, somewhere up here. Yeah, somewhere around there. A little patch of ocean. It's called the Grand Banks. At the time Glasgow gained its preeminence, there had been 400 years of fishing on the Grand Banks. When Jacques Cartier, who was the first French explorer to discover North America, showed up in the Baie de Chaleur in 1506, there were 300 Basque fishing vessels moored there too. The Basques had known about the Grand Banks for 150 years, and they had been there. That's where the salt cod came. So 400 years of fishing on the Grand Banks. Glasgow was the closest port to the Grand Banks. Fishing vessels need finance. Nobody can afford to send a vessel abroad for 3 to 4 months. There's no owner of a fishing vessel. So there was this merchant banking where rich people financed fishing expeditions. It's partly where insurance came about. And then the bankers would insure them against risk, money both on putting together the deals and on the insurance. So there was a long-established merchant banking industry. And Glasgow had one of Europe's oldest engineering schools. A good engineering school with aggressive recruiting of bright engineers, and put those ingredients together, and you got Silicon Valley. By the way, these are the same ingredients that got put together in logs to the same ingredients that brought the real today's Silicon Valley together. Okay. Point here is that the reasons for Glasgow's sales were mostly invisible to most people. You would attribute the fact that you've got an engineering school to all this happening. But without the brains from the engineering school, remember, people didn't move around much then. So the people who graduated Glasgow engineering tended to stay in Glasgow. Without those brains, there wouldn't have been the ship innovations. There couldn't have been the industry. Without the merchant banking, there wasn't finance. Without the port access, there wasn't the shipping flow. All those things were absolutely important, mostly invisible to most people. Well, it's kind of like that today, too. Let's talk about some invisible effects. Here's one in the moment. We all consume energy. It's way, way too invisible. When you plug into the wall, it's just a physical connection. You can't see the electricity down there. We really don't, most of us don't have a good handle on how much energy we actually use. So let's just do a little test. How much do you use every day? If you had to go leave the house in the morning, carrying the oil, coal, and natural gas you used that day, how much would you carry? I want you to think about that just for a bit. Just make an answer for yourselves. And you can compare to what the stats. I'm not sure in this next set of stats whether it's marginal. It definitely doesn't include embodied energy, but whether it's personal energy use or whether it's across or just across societal energy use, I think it's averaged. So if you had to carry a backpack, how much coal, oil, and natural gas would be in it when you left to go to work every day? That doesn't even take into account the hydro, the wind, the solar. You know, that's like, well, you take the natural gas doesn't weigh much, but we're talking 20 to 22 kilograms. We have to have energy, of physical energy, carbon-based energy that we burn every day, every single one of us. Now, these are stats for America, which is one of the highest in the world, not the highest, but they're comparable to the stats from other places. Canada per capita is even a little higher because we've got brutal winters. Interestingly enough, Scandinavia isn't because they figured out how to build better. So, it's an invisible effect because we don't see this, we don't feel this, we don't experience it. It's fundamental to where life is going today. Now, here's some other invisible effects. But rather than I chose these because they have a longer delay in time. One is air transportation. By the way, how much of that budget is due to air transportation? You can drive for a year your car, and it's like a flight between North America and Europe and back. It's something of that order. I might not have that stat perfect. But air transportation feels good. Most of us use it. It makes us very mobile. It's critical to the flow of information today, therefore critical to the flow of wealth. It's been an agent of diaspora, people moving around. We owe of the I think very vital cultural and racial mix in the world today to this mode of transportation. It looks kind of romantic when there's one plane. It looks a bit weirder when you realize that's a sample of the planes that take off from one airport in one day. We use a lot of plane traffic. It's a very, very big system. And many of us own cars, and cars are kind of fun. And if you're like me, you own an old car and you play with it. But we kind of like cars, and the car industry sells us cars primarily on the romance of owning a car, not on its practicality. Especially they don't show us slides like this, which is from China. But you can find a scene like this in lots of places. And it's this effect, this invisible effect. We don't see it when we have our own individual experiences of cars out on a nice Sunday drive in some national park in North America, but we feel it every day to the point where freeway congestion, car congestion, is a major economic drag on many of the cities in which we live. It is actually a pretty severe economic cost if you simply spend a quarter or a third or half your day going to the meetings you need to go to for whatever role you're playing, whatever you're doing. So, but these systems aren't foreordained. These systems aren't just technical systems when some arrogant architect or engineer designs and then some banker approves and gets built. They're not just technical systems. People in politics over history have played incredibly formative roles in them. In fact, in many places, definitional roles. I'll give you some examples, and I'll pick 5 relatively extreme examples of freeway development. Los Angeles, Toronto, San Francisco, Vancouver, and Adelaide to demonstrate these things. They build stuff like this in Vancouver, in Los Angeles, and in China, and most of us would say, that's crazy. It takes up an enormous amount of land. And it does not really appear to solve mobility problems. This is Toronto. Where is the busiest highway in North America and the most congested? Okay, it isn't in Los Angeles. It's this highway that flows north of Toronto, the McDonald-Cartier Freeway. It's to the point where between 7 a.m. and 10, maybe 11 a.m., and 3 p.m. and 6 to 7 p.m., don't bother trying to get on the freeway system in Toronto. You'll need to get anywhere. And, it's a 16, 20 lane highway all the way across the north of the city, branches into the north. San Francisco has a freeway system, and this was a plan for an extensive freeway system that went all the way through the city. San Francisco is a tiny city. This would have put about a quarter of the land in San Francisco into freeways. Some of these were not built. The ones over here were canceled 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So you see most of the network was planned and canceled. We'll come back to these purple ones. This was Vancouver. Vancouver's even smaller than San Francisco. This north-south freeway was called the North-South Freeway. It was plotted to go through land where a 10 meter by 30 meter lot today costs 2 million Canadian dollars. The most desired area of addresses in Vancouver, probably in Canada. So this freeway would have cut up a prime residential neighborhood, would have gone right through a really important commercial area, and would have chopped our waterfront forever off from the city. This is a low fidelity sketch. The high fidelity sketches just aren't available online and have to go to the archives and scan it. You would have seen a Vancouver today that would be largely freeway with a little bit of city. And that, I believe, was the site of the 1986 Expo, which now is a very high-density residential area. And contributes to Vancouver actually having a reverse problem from most cities. More people leave Vancouver today to go to work outside of Vancouver than come into Vancouver. It's actually reversed the transit problem. This is a model of the Vancouver system, none of which got built. Okay, Adelaide, South Australia, same thing happened. There was a proposal for a freeway system that would have cut through this suburb. Adelaide is a city planned in 1836 by Colonel Light as a rough square mile of inner city, a little patch here, surrounded by parks. It's one of the most livable small cities on the planet. This freeway system would have gone what is now the most expensive area of Adelaide, because it's close to this lovely downtown core and parkland, the parkland in northern Adelaide, and would have gone through this key industrial and now gentrifying area. It didn't happen. Now, all 5 of these cities actually have very, very strong citizen protests. Really strong. That's what made them have stuff in common. The protests were really strong, even in Los Angeles, to the cancellation of major freeway systems. Freeway system in Los Angeles would be even better, the urban sprawl even worse, the congestion even more so without these protests. Now, how do they differ? Geography, Toronto and Los Angeles have more available flat land than San Francisco and Adelaide. History. Freeway building started earlier in Toronto and Los Angeles. San Francisco and Vancouver all had relatively stronger urban cores. Although Toronto's urban core was interesting, it had a very strong urban core, but it spread out along the Kings or Queens Highway, depending on what generation you were in, Highway 2. It spread out a long way along that highway before the freeway system came in. They differed in people. Central can play an important role. Prior to the freeway, the Spadina Freeway controversy in Toronto, Jane Jacobs, do you know who Jane Jacobs is? Yeah, classical writer about cities. She moved. That killed the freeways, because when Jane spoke, people listened, and she spoke really, really loudly. And clearly. Had a character named Don Dunstan, who was the premier. He wasn't central to the revolt. Because of the freeway revolt, there was a change of government, and Dunstan came in. And Dunstan was probably the most civilized person who's ever been a premier in Australia. And he took a look at this situation and said, urban qualities freeway? No, there'll never be a freeway here. And he was also very, very strong public persona, and thoughtful stuff he said stuck for generations in Adelaide. Los Angeles, in comparison, had a group of very accomplished people, I'll talk about in a bit, didn't seem to get traction for their key idea. And here's their key idea. The people who put this report together, these were like the head city planner, head executive of the mayor's office, key people in Congress, key people in the state legislature, senior engineers in private firms. These were the heavyweights, real heavyweight people. They put together this report and said, there are 3 ways to move people daily in a community, by auto, by bus, and by rail. The group is convinced that a combination of all 3 is necessary. And they proposed in the freeway building in Los Angeles that the median strips become rail lines. And they all the finances. This was a solid proposition. Cheaper than freeways. Self-financing. Somehow it didn't stick. And I make a habit when I do presentations. I tell you where I get the stuff. So it's we can make a PDF of this presentation available to you. And every source that I cite, I triangulate. If it was a web source, I triangulated with other sources. If it was an academic source, I checked its validity. So the stuff I'm in here is, I believe, the best and most solid material I could find. Okay, here's a possible explanation, because these cities were really different. Los Angeles and Toronto have major transit problems today. The cities are paying a very high cost of congestion, a very, very high cost in pollution, a very high financial cost for the residents in car ownership and operation. The urban myth is if you stick a frog in water and you bring the water to a boil, the frog won't do anything until he's soaked, right? He doesn't notice the creeping difference. Pollution's kind of like that. Climate change is kind of like that for us. Whereas, and Toronto and Los Angeles never noticed, they didn't see this train wreck coming. Vancouver and Adelaide had their freeway proposals at a time after they could see what was happening to Los Angeles and Toronto and other places. Freeway proposal sort of put on the table all at once. So instead of creep, you had all at once proposals. And the citizen revolts in both of these places were they just stood up and said, no, ain't happening. And and in both places, there were changes of government that took place over the freeway revolt. Changes from right-wing to left-wing government. Actually, I did that right from you, right-wing to left-wing. Now, San Francisco had all of it. San Francisco had early development coming. When there was a major freeway proposal to freewayize, to put freeways through the urban core, there was a major definitive citizens' revolt, and then San Francisco had a great event. Wasn't so great in the moment, It was a great event. Had an earthquake. Had an earthquake that wrecked 2 freeways. All the freeway planners who were saying, you can't close freeways, it'll create congestion. It'll create a congestive nightmare. And by the way, there were plans in San Francisco in the late 80s before the earthquake to dismantle some of the freeways. But they weren't going anywhere. Then the earthquake hit. Freeways weren't available. Congestion didn't happen. It didn't happen. People adapted. So they took down the freeways. This was the Embarcadero Freeway. It went right through the city, right along the waterfront, right in front of this great building. You had to go under a dirty freeway to connect with the water. This is it today. At lunchtime, and I was there about a couple of months ago for a research meeting, there's about 200,000 people walking up and down there that connected the business with the water again. I don't know the stats, but my guess is about double the value of land. It's an amazingly public place now. And there's development going along this waterfront area. And somewhere in Vancouver, there's a park with a statue commemorating the freeway revolt. The freeway revolt that predated the earthquake. But it set the stage for that when the earthquake occurred, the populace was already ready to say, let's just get rid of them. Let's not repair them. Let's get rid of the ones that are broken. And more on the way. So the fact that a city history does not necessarily preordain its future. It does condition it strongly. Let's go on to another case. Most cities have recycling. We were surprised to find out when we came to Zurich a month ago that the recycling in Zurich, we shouldn't have been surprised, is very different from what it is in the city we live in Vancouver, in Canada, and most other Canadian cities. Our immediate snap to surface judgment was hasn't gone as far as it has. How many of you are from cities that have blue bin programs? Do you know what it means? Where in your house you have a blue bin, and sometimes you have multiple blue bins. And right now in Canada, in most cities, you just throw it into the blue bin. Milk containers, metal, plastic, it gets sorted out later. So it's a major convenience not have to sort it yourself. However, you still have to sort paper, newsprint, batteries you have to take somewhere else. Styrofoam you have to take somewhere else, but no. We just got styrofoam accepted in this. So there's been a simplification of the recycling stream. And we're seeing the systems go to an increased simplification of what people have to do to recycle. But how did it start? The story is Canadian. The story is actually, it's actually further than Canadian. It's southwestern Ontario. In 1969, a bunch of academics from the University of Toronto and students formed a nonprofit organization called Pollution Probe, whose purpose was basically to raise awareness. In 1974, the beaches area of Toronto, the L05 Foundation was set up, and that was the first recycling program in Canada. Was volunteers picking up recycling curbside. In 1977, some of the people involved in these initiatives and other people set up a company called Resource Integration Systems. It was a consultant about recycling. Now, at this point in time, we threw stuff out. There was recycling. There was no financial case for it. Well, there was minimal recycling. We recycled heavy metal. We recycle car bodies. But there was the minimal economic model, minimal incentives for it, and it was not preordained that we would go to a recycling-intensive society. And then in the 1970s, the Canadian forces know the whole story here. The military is the most profligate waste generator in every system. But the Canadian Forces Base started a pilot recycling. A few years later, they found out about these guys and hired them for a pilot project. And the solution was to go get milk cartons from the local dairy, some milk cartons, put your recycling in them and put them in curbside. So that was first done at a military base in Canada, Camp Borden. In 1977, there was a community-based grassroots bottom-up festival organized in Kitchener. Why Kitchener? It's a college town. You guys were the ones who organized this festival. Wouldn't have happened in a non-college town. Organized this garbage fest, which brought this into the awareness of the Kitchener-Waterloo community. Kitchener and Waterloo are two twin cities. In 1978, another non-profit, the Recycling Council of Ontario, and in 1991, there was a kitchen pilot project in which the blue bin was invented. Now, the critical elements of the blue bin program are that you keep stuff in your house, you put it out in front of your house in public, it gets collected. There are urban myths about why blue. The one I kind of like is so you can see it against the snow. That's the one I like. There are others. Stuff to do. There's one that says it has to do with UV light. That was the best plastic color at the time for UV. I'm going with the snow. In 1984, based on this pilot, there was a citywide contract. The low bid for that contract did not include a recycling program. City council meeting that was to decide the contract, who showed up? You guys. And you made it very clear that you wanted a recycling program. So they accepted the lowest bid that had a recycling program. And the recycling was Laidlaw, and they were the same company that was involved with this program. The program went viral before we had the term viral. It went viral. It spread across Ontario and Canada in just a very, very years. So here we see a program that took a lot of people over a long period of time to invent something that works. And there's, by the way, there's a great application on this. Links down there. The logic of the blue box. First of all, it took time to invent it. It created a near hierarchy out of a hierarchy. It made in our complex systems that are cities, in that we now have streams of material being repurposed for other things, creating their own problem. Soccer fields, they're repurposed tire rubber, the black stuff in modern artificial soccer fields is repurposed tire rubber. We're beginning to realize there's a possible cancer connection with that rubber because we're seeing lymphoma and leukemia cancers primarily in soccer goals. These systems can have weird, unanticipated effects. But the blue box logic is you remove obstacles to participation. As long as you have to take recycling to a depot, the participation rate is low. The moment you can make participation really easy, people will do it. And by making participation obvious, you increase motivation. And I should have another point in this slide. I'll talk to that. You increase motivation. There's a shame factor. If you don't have your blue bin out, why? The blue bins are public. That's an important part of it. Another important part of it is one of the vehicles towards recycling, one of the chief change agents are your kids. It's the teachers in the schools who are telling the kids about recycling programs and then suggesting none too subtly that they go home and bug mom and dad about them. That was actually an important change factor too. Okay, I'll move to the third example. So I'm trying to show here that we have these complex cities They're not determined, they're deeply affected by their history, build up in these cities complex, nearly hierarchical technical systems over time. But at key moments in almost every successful city, many people, not just the engineers and the arrogant architects, get involved and make the decisions better. I have the full story about Curitiba. How many of you have seen these transit stops? Yeah, they're really, really they're really popular as images for a good transit system. That's like the tip of the iceberg. They're neat stops because you pay here. So by the time you get inside, it's like being in the Bahnhof. You just get on the bus. The buses only have to stop, which means in the none too secure South American cities, the drivers don't have to carry any money or handle any money at all. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. This is a city organized around its public transit system. The roads are secondary. The busways, which are busway only, they're like freeways. They're double lane, they're double direction busways, dedicated busways. It's busways, no. Because Curitiba was poor. They could build railways. Busways, not rail. And the system gradually developed over time. I don't have the full story here, but I can't imagine this happening without a fairly large and diverse group of people involved. It's a very, very sophisticated and successful system. A city of 1.7 million, 75% of the movement, the people movement in vehicles happens in the transit system. Curitiba got this right. Okay, so in the talk today, I'm going to leave you with some questions. Can you find examples of urban changes which were interesting combinations of climate, design, economics, history, but especially people and politics? I'll bet you in your own personal experience have some of these. And on the other hand, can you find examples of positive urban changes that occurred top-down? Happen. French Revolution riots and the urban plan, the Parisian boulevards, cut through the fabric of Paris so the military could fire cannons down the boulevard in case of another riot. That's why it happened. Over the long term, it was an advantage to the city. Over the short term, it was the biggest slum clearance project in European history to that point in time. Okay, here's some current kinds of change in which people are deeply involved. Locavore movement, eat local, that's changing urban farmland. It's changing the nature of urban farmland because as urban farmland can become more dedicated to local produce, there's a market for that produce, a more valuable. It makes that land more valuable. That's working against urban sprawl. Bicycle transit in cities, Vancouver has just had a very vociferous and public debate about transit as lanes are being taken away from cars and being given to bicycles in rainy Vancouver. And guess what's not happening? Congestion. There's less avenues for cars and people are adapting. Coffee, books, and Wi-Fi was less about people and just more about the market. As bookstores were losing clientele and there was this Wi-Fi thing, coffee and coffee shops and now entering coffee in bookstores and surf the web. This one's an interesting force as it's happening right now. Big box retail has economies of scale that make a lot of things cheaper. City centers suffered, but what's happening right now is the big box's biggest threat. Big threats. One is urban revolt. A lot of cities are revolting against it and not allowing big box in the downtown center and city centers and people can get around more easily. The demand for big box is going down, although it's still very high. This is the real threat to big box retailers. Because for many, many products now in North America, Amazon has gotten shipping so low, often free. The prices are cheaper than big box retail. People go to a big box retailer to look at the appliance, go off and buy on Amazon cheaper and get it shipped to their home for free. So we're beginning to see some real change in the way retail is running. District heating is a classic example in wastewater. District heating works better or heating buildings, when you have geothermal energy, works better at a campus scale than it does at a building scale. So it works better when you have, and the economic case is better when you have 10 or 100 buildings than when you have one. Way better, in fact. So you're seeing contractual forms of development in which district heating systems are being put in place for collective buildings. Wastewater, of course, better on a whole city level than it does on an individual building level. So not surprisingly, we've had citywide wastewater systems. Gray water systems work better on the block level. It's better to process the gray water before it leaves the site. And there are now technological ways to do that, basically by building wetlands in your neighborhood. And it's safe, it's technologically feasible, and there's a whole lot less flooding and pollution opportunities. And we're beginning to see this happen at a campus level. And I'll leave the last one with something that's close to home. I'm told this hasn't happened in Zurich. Worldwide, design studios are a whole lot less full now than they were a generation ago. A whole lot less. And and there's a very simple reason, most of you have one with you. It's called a laptop. Our design desks get too portable. We can work anywhere. And a consequence is that one of the premier avenues of engagement in an architectural and design education gets demoted. People learn best when they're surrounded by other people doing work and when the work's on the walls. We learn from example. Empty design studios mean there's fewer examples around, meaning that very, very important part of learning is demoted in importance. And there's also a very important part of design education which changed. Whether it's been demoted or not, I don't know. And that's that the design and engineering industries are industries of personal networking. Your career trajectory has an enormous amount to do with the associations that you make. You make many of those associations that are at school. You do a lot of that just by being there, by being involved in projects. So, these are all changes that happen in our complex systems. These are just some examples. The point of the lecture today was to point out, particularly in democratic societies where the cost and risk of protest is very low, interesting things can happen when people speak out. Okay. I broke a rule today. I talked too much. But I was told I only had 45 minutes. Questions or comments? We will make the PDF available. There's a lot, I think, of good stuff in there. And if I have one ask of all of you, let's go read Simon's article. That's a foundational article for thinking about design and for graduate level thinking about design. And so much of design theory is implicitly or explicitly based on that article. Okay. Darn, I hate silent audiences. But thank you.